Hey everybody, it's Joe from greenlightsound.com, and in today's video we're going to learn how to take some drums from this raw sound to this mixed sound. How to salvage this drum recording. First thing you may notice is I'm working in Pro Tools, not Studio One like I usually do, but this is an older session that I did in Pro Tools, and it's good to have familiarity with multiple DAWs if you can. Second thing, I am going to use triggers for the kick, the snare, and the toms in this one, some samples. And there's some controversy about when to use samples or to use samples at all, and some people swear by using samples. Some people are totally against the triggering in samples. In my opinion, if the track calls for it, if you need it, if it helps it, use them. If it doesn't, don't. If you're a recording engineer and you're trying to get your best sound out of the drums, don't rely on samples down the line. Try to get the best sound at the source. But sometimes as mixing engineers, we get less than ideal tracks, so we have to use samples. So that's just my opinion. So the very first thing I'd like to do is turn all this processing off again and focus just on the kick part. And here is the kick drum by itself, the raw track, just as I received it. Boxy, not a lot of low end. This whole kit, in fact, was recorded with SM57s, and that's not the ideal mic for a kick drum. So the first thing I did was instantiate a trim plugin. That's just a gain stage. This plugin is unusual, the Many American delay, and you may be wondering why a delay plugin on a kick drum part. The only reason I'm doing this, in fact, I have the dry-wet ratio all the way down to completely dry, is allowing my mono kick. This is a mono to stereo plugin, so it allows the mono kick to be output as a stereo signal, which allows me to use other plugins later on, specifically our next one, Trigger 2 from Slate Digital, or Stephen Slate. Trigger 2, in the kick samples I used, has some kick room sounds. And I want those room sounds to be a stereo sound, not a mono room, but the sound of the reverberations around the room in stereo. In order to do that from a mono signal, I had to put that delay before to give me a stereo out. That's the only reason it's there. So here is without trigger, and then I'll instantiate trigger, and you hear the huge change that this sample makes. Huge sound difference. The next thing we have is analog channel from McDSP, just giving some sound of a console. And this is the SSLE preset. Here it is before and after. Just thicken things out a bit. And speaking of thickening things out, here's our VTM, virtual tape machines, without and with. Again, just sort of filling some of that sound out, giving some of that analog vibe. And finally, I've got an EQ here. This is the Melda Production M Dynamic EQ. I've got a high-pass filter, only up to about 32 Hertz, just cutting out that extreme low end. A boost in the low end, scoop of the mids, and a boost up here for the click of the kick attack. And here's the sound with and without, starting without our EQ. Really brings out that click. It sounds a little unnatural with the kick solo by itself, but in the context of the track or the full drum mix, it sounds a lot better having the attack of that kick drum come through. So again, boost the lows, cut the mids, boost the high end around 4K or so. Moving on to our snare drum part. It's another trim plugin, just a gain stage. Another Many American delay, just to make sure we go from mono to stereo. And here's our Trigger 2 snare sound, without and with. Huge difference, obviously. Totally changes the sound. You've got snare 11A, the close mic, 2 room mics, the old Zepp snare close mic, and 2 room mics. And again, that room mic sound kind of fills everything out in stereo. Another analog channel, just to get some of that analog vibe. Another VTM by Slate. And the EQ on the snare is not a lot going on. Really, it's just high-pass filtering, bringing out the low end, the subs that we don't need. A boost for the meat in the snare, and that's it. That little boost just kind of fills in the body of the snare drum. For the tom part, we've got similar processing, but our EQ in this one, just a high-pass filter, that's all we've got going on, and VTM. Here's the tom by itself. Without processing, here's the tom part. Not great. And with. The low tom part, same processing order. We've got dynamic EQ cutting out that bottom end and the VTM. So the only thing that's really happening here is the trigger, and this tom is the new Maple 4. The other one, the high tom, was Maple Tom 3. Here's the low tom part. This time I'm going to go without any processing first. Not great. Now with processing. Great. All right. Hi-hat part. I don't always use a hi-hat part. In this case, I did in the verse. Here it is without processing. Analog channel again for some of that analog vibe. The EQ here is interesting. What I'm doing here is high-pass filtering all that snare and kick bleed out, anything below 600 hertz. I'm scooping out some of the 2K range where it was a little bit harsh, and a slight little boost in that top end. Really just effectively getting rid of the bleed with that EQ. The next plugin's interesting. I'm adding some parallel harmonics up here with Sugar from Process Audio. Here it is bypassed. And with. I'll push it. Just allow some of that high-end harmonic information to be added and a tiny bit of saturation too. And then again, another VTM to give that tape vibe. That's all routed to a track we call close mics. And the close mics is only there in order to align those close kit pieces with the overhead, with the auto align there. Speaking of overheads, here's the overhead track all by itself. Really weak again, so we did analog channel to fill things out. And this EQ, I engage the dynamics on. You'll see, when I turn it on, it becomes a dynamic EQ. So every time the snare's hitting, there's a huge drop in the signal. The reason that's happening is that I wanted these overhead tracks, because they were recorded kind of poorly, to really just be a cymbal track. They're there to capture crash cymbal hits, the splash cymbal in the beginning, and that's about it. So I wanted to cut out as much of that information from the kick and snare as I could. I'm going to jump back to the chorus here where it's playing more on the cymbals. After that, I went back to Sugar again to add some of that top end back in. Without. And with. And then smoothed it out with our virtual tape machines. So all of these tracks are being parallel processed. We've got parallel drums send here to an 1176 style plug-in from T-Rax, the T-Rax Black 76 from IK Multimedia. So it's got attack all the way to the left, release all the way to the right. You can see the input and output gain here. It's a 20:1 ratio for this parallel sound. So what I'm going to do is have all of these tracks soloed up. I'm going to take out the parallel drums and then bring it back in. So take a look over here at the solo button. You'll see when I bring it back in. Just bring some body to the drum part. It's really all it's there to do. And if I really push the volume up, you can really hear what it's doing. That's all being routed to a drums bus. And on the drums bus, again, analog channel. Here it is with and without. Nice full sound. Virtual tape machines. Really feels in the low end. The T-Rax British channel, an SSL clone. And in this one, I'm kind of boosting the low end, cutting out the low mids a bit, tiny bit of a boost on the high end, and engaging the compressor. Though the compressor's not actually showing any compression, it's definitely happening. Here it is without first and then with. Just a little bit showing up with compressor. That really fills things out. That's cool. And finally, a bus compressor, the SSL style FG Gray. I'll start without it on and you'll hear it engaged. Mostly controlling the snare drum transient and gluing everything together. And those two things are being sent to a reverb. In this case, I just kind of scooped out the low and top end with Pro Q3 and then went into a Manny American reverb on medium room. Got to kind of give a room sound. If I bring that back in, here is the full drum mix. And in the verse with the hi-hat. So that shows you how you can take a really rough home studio style recording, recorded with less than ideal equipment that sounds like this. And get it to sound like a fully mixed, full recording that was recorded in a professional studio. So, if you have any questions about this video or anything else, let me know in the comment section down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next one.